Okay.
So we are we have been going through the books of history. We started with Joshua, Judges, and First and Second Samuel, and now we are to First Kings. Um, First and Second Kings and the history section. Well, not really the history section. There is Chronicles and a few others that sort of are part of it, but they go through to the exile. So we're essentially from the end of David's reign into Solomon, and then all the way to when they are. Oh, there's Nancy.
Yeah, good morning.
All the way to where they are exiled to Babylon. So I would say one kind of important note is that it's definitely written in a different literary style to a certain degree than First and Second Samuel. You remember it was sometimes kind of hard to read First and Second Samuel because it was uh, there was no like break. It was sort of action, 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 action. And so Kings has some sections that are more they're historical, they're written in a historical way, but there's also some sort of um, poetic things. There are the description of the building of the temple. When we do these Bible studies, I typically don't skip any parts. We will be skipping parts in Kings because there's like 8 pages in a row about the building of the temple, and it's incredibly detailed. So if you want to, we can read them, but it's about as dry as it gets, and we may point out some things in it, but we years ago, I was when I was here, since I've been here, we read that part of Kings. We read about the building of the temple, and we kind of studied a little bit. Um, it's very, very dry, but there are some great stories. You know how First and Samuel was all about war and politics and infighting.
Mhm.
There weren't really many character stories. I don't. I mean, for lack of a better term, Kings has some character stories. I was just this morning. I was looking at it. The healing of Naaman, if you remember that story, and the some of the stories of Elisha. Um, there's some. Um, it's similar to First Samuel in some ways, but also there's interspersed with some stories. So that I think are interesting. So it does have a different feel from First and Samuel. Um, yeah, a lot of it is also the story of Solomon too, and Solomon is I think Solomon's a very interesting story. Like I sort of hinted at this before, so this is going to be a surprise to you, not to sound heretical like I often do, but I wonder that they always say, like, when Jesus is born from the city of David, the King of Kings, Sid David, and I'm like, David's David's fine, but David's a scoundrel 90% of his story. There's a few redeemable spots here and there, but David's kind of, and they hold David up as the King of Kings. Solomon is far more interesting to me. Not better or worse, because there's some points that Solomon's a little interesting, but Solomon has more sort of layers to his personality, I think. So, and it's interesting to follow him. So we will have what we had before in terms of um, some of those. A lot of names are going to fly at us at different points. We'll try to slow down and figure out where those things are. So we're at the beginning of First Kings. King David was old and advanced in years, and although they covered him with clothes, he could not get warm. So his servant said to him, let a young virgin be sought for my lord the king, and let her wait on the king, and be his attendant. Let her lie in your bosom, so that my lord the king may be warm. So they searched for a beautiful girl throughout all the territory of Israel, and found Abishag the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The king was the girl was very beautiful. She became the king's attendant and served him, but the king did not know her sexually. It's an important point. So she's just there to keep him warm in bed, but not to have sex with him.
Yeah.
Now, because we talked about that in Samuel, when it says the king went into the room, it usually means that they had sex. That's the implication, right? But here it went out of the way to you actually use the word, which I think is interesting. Now Adonijah, son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. He prepared for himself chariots and horsemen, and 50 men to run before him. His father had never at any time displeased him, so by asking, why have you done thus and so? He was also a very handsome man, and he was born next after Absalom. So this is related to David, because Absalom was his son. So this is David's oldest son, essentially David's oldest remaining son, because a lot of them died before. He conferred with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with the priest Abiathar, and they supported Adonijah. But the priest Zadok and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and the prophet Nathan and Shimei and Ray and David's own warriors did not side with Adonijah. So now you have a split in the royal court of who supports the potential new king. Adonijah sacrificed sheep, oxen, and fatted cattle by the stone Zoheleth, which is beside En Rogel, and he invited all his brothers, the king's sons, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite the prophet Nathan or Benaiah or the warriors or his brother Solomon. So you hear about in the Roman Empire, sons both claiming that they were going to be the emperor, and fighting over who got to be emperor. It's already is setting up like a fight, right, between Adonijah and Solomon. Adonijah is not inviting the people that don't support him to his sort of coronation party. Then Nathan said to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, remember Bathsheba,
Mm-hmm.
have you not heard that Adonijah, son of Haggith, has become king, and our Lord David does not know it? Now therefore come, let me give you advice, that you may save your own life and the life of your son Solomon. Go in at once to King David and say to him, did you not, my lord the king, swear to your servant, saying, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne? Why then is Adonijah king? Then while you are still there speaking with the king, I will come in after you and confirm your words. So we have some of that political intrigue here a little bit, right? No one has officially been named king, but they're already sort of scrambling for the power. At least Adonijah is. Right? So Bathsheba went to the king in his room. The king was very old. Abishag the Shunammite was attending the king. Bathsheba bowed and did obeisance to the king, and the king said, what do you wish? She said to him, my lord, you swore to your servant by the Lord your God, saying, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne. But now suddenly Adonijah has become king, though you, my lord the king, do not know it. He has sacrificed oxen, fatted cattle, and sheep in abundance, and has invited all the children of the king, the priest Abiathar and Joab, the commander of the army. But his servant Solomon he has not invited. But you, my lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you to tell them who shall sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise it will come to pass, when my lord the king sleeps with his ancestors, that my son Solomon and I will be counted offenders. So this is all sort of previously to this in Samuel. Solomon is anointed, but Solomon has an eldest son, and who does the throne go to? goes to the eldest son.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Adonijah is not doing anything that's not true. Adonijah is following what he thinks is the right way, but he's also not. He's sort of dissing those who won't support him as king, even though technically, by history, it's his right as the oldest son. While she was still speaking with the king, the prophet Nathan came in. The king was told, "Here is your prophet Nathan." When he came in before the king, he did obeisance to the king with his face to the ground. Nathan said, "My lord the king, you have said Adonijah shall succeed me as king, and he shall have you said, Adonijah shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne. For today he has gone down and has sacrificed oxen, fatted cattle, and sheep in abundance, and invited all the king's children, Joab the commander of the army, and the priest Abiathar, who are now eating and drinking before him, saying, Long live King Adonijah. But he did not invite me, your servant, and the priest Zadok, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and your servant Solomon. Has this thing been brought about by my lord the king, and have you not let your servants know who should sit on the throne of my lord the king after him?" So we have this problem of succession, like I said, happen. So I don't know why I keep thinking of this, but I'm just gonna dig into it. The Emperor Constantine, in the early 300s AD, is one of two sons that are vying to be the emperor of Rome, and they have armies, and they're fighting. And the reason Christianity sort of grew into a worldwide religion was because Constantine won. And Constantine was had a battle at a bridge, and he was looking for a sign from God, and he had a vision of a cross. A cross up to this point had never been a symbol of Christianity. A cross that was in the shape of a sword. And he says, "By this cross, I will defeat my brother," meaning by the sword that was also the cross. And so he promised to God to make Christianity the religion of the empire, and he eventually won and became emperor. And I don't know, I keep thinking of that because it's sort of an interesting historical note, but here we have a similar kind of thing where you have these two sons that are, I don't know, Solomon seems young at this point because Solomon has not had a voice yet. And I think he's not very old. But this happens so many times in so many places where multiple heirs to the throne lay claim to the throne. And it's interesting to me, what would happen if Constantine hadn't gained, become the emperor. Christianity would not be the same today as it just wouldn't be the same today.
Well, didn't Constantine's mother have a lot to do with that too, though?
Yes. Yeah. Well, it also mattered that they fought and he won.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. But I think that too, Solomon, remember Solomon, we're going to see here in a little bit, Solomon built the temple. So what if the Adonijah ends up being king? It changes Jewish history. Right. So just because you have these two sons who both have a claim sort of opposing each other. Okay, so we are on verse 28. King David answered, "Summon Bathsheba to me." So she came into the king's presence and stood before the king. The king swore, saying, "As the Lord lives, who has saved my life from every adversity, as I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne in my place. So will I do this day." Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the ground and did obeisance to the king and said, "May my lord King David live forever." King David said, "Summon to me the priest Zadok, the prophet Nathan, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada." When they came before the king said to them, "Take with you the servants of your lord, and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule and bring him down to Gihon. There let the priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan anoint him king over Israel. Then blow the trumpet and say, 'Long live King Solomon.' You shall go up following him. Let him enter and sit on my throne. He shall be king in my place. For I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and over Judah." Benaiah son of Jehoiada answered the king, Amen. May the Lord, the God of my lord the king, so ordain. As the Lord has been with my lord the king, so may he be with Solomon, and make his throne greater than the throne of my lord King David. So the priest Zadok, the prophet Nathan, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites went down and had Solomon ride on King David's mule, and led him to Gihon. I guess we should stop. There's been, I don't have the reference in front of me, but there are multiple references in previous books about holy spots. I'm assuming Gihon is one of them, Gihon. The other son, Adonijah, went somewhere else. Where was it? He went another place. You hear them that we read this in previous books where and someone made an altar there in honor of the Lord or something like that. So they're going to these places that have significance for these sort of transferring of power and stuff. Verse 39. There the priest Zadok took the horn of oil from the tent and anointed Solomon. Then they blew the trumpet, and all the people said, Long live King Solomon. And all the people went up following him, playing on pipes and rejoicing with great joy, so that the earth quaked at their noise. Adonijah and all the guests who were with him heard it as they finished feasting. Well, what's going to happen now? They heard the trumpet and the long-lived King Solomon. When Joab heard the sound of the trumpet, he said, Why is the city in an uproar? While he was still speaking, Jonathan, son of the priest Abiathar, arrived. Adonijah said, Come in, for you are a worthy man, and surely you bring good news. Jonathan answered Adonijah, No, for our Lord King David has made Solomon king. The king had sent with him the priest Zadok, the prophet Nathan, and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and they had him ride on the king's mule. The priest Zadok and the prophet Nathan have anointed him king at Gihon, and they have gone up from there rejoicing. So the city is in an uproar. This is the noise that you heard. Solomon now sits on the royal throne. Moreover, the king's servants came to congratulate our Lord King David, saying, May God make the name of Solomon more famous than yours, and make his throne greater than your throne. The king bowed in worship on the bed and went on to pray thus. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who today has granted one of my offspring to sit on my throne and permitted me to witness it. Then all the guests of Adonijah got up trembling and went their own ways. Uh-oh, we backed the wrong horse. Adonijah, fearing Solomon, got up and went to grasp the horns of the altar. Solomon was informed. Adonijah is afraid of King Solomon. See, he has laid hold of the horns of the altar, saying, Let King Solomon swear to me first that he will not kill his servant with the sword. So what he means by grab the horns of the altar actually had sort of spikes on it. And I don't know if this is a specific posture, but essentially he is, imagine if you sort of knew you had done wrong to someone and you went to church and knelt at the rail and prayed and essentially praying for forgiveness. That's kind of what he's doing. He's hoping that he won't be. Remember, a lot of the times when this sort of thing happens, the other person just kills the other person, right? But hopefully, he's thinking, hopefully this won't happen in a church because I'm going to the church to essentially ask for forgiveness. So let King Solomon swear to me first that he will not kill his servant with the sword. So Solomon responded, If he proves to be a worthy man, not one of his hairs shall fall to the ground. But if wickedness is found in him, he shall die. Then King Solomon sent to have him brought down from the altar. He came to do obeisance to King Solomon, and Solomon said to him, Go home.
Yeah.
So it was it's an interesting story because it's kind of like Adonijah assumed a lot of things without, well, I'm the eldest son, so clearly I'm going to be king, but nobody has said I'm king. The King David hasn't said anything, right? He made a lot of assumptions which were incorrect. And it could have come, if it had been Samuel, it probably would have come to blows, you know. All that kind of thing came to blows in the previous books. But when David's time to die drew near, he charged his son Solomon, saying, I am about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong, be courageous, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. Then the Lord will establish his word that he spoke concerning me. If your heirs take heed to their way to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel. So one of the things is he promises here essentially that David promises to Solomon is that you will have an heir, which sounds like, well, of course he can have children, but remember it the succession of David and from Saul to David, neither of those were without some incident. Remember David killed some of his own sons, and one of his sons killed some of his sons, partly because of this whole succession thing, right? So David promising Solomon that he will have an heir is kind of a big deal, especially on his deathbed. Moreover, you know also what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether, whom he murdered, retaliating in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist and on the sandals on his feet. Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. This is interesting to me because Joab was a loyal general of David, all throughout the previous books. But now Joab was siding with his elder son Adonijah, and there had been that story about him killing people in a time of peace. So it's sort of David's bringing up old stories of bad blood against someone who he has, Joab and he have worked together a lot. Through all those times that David was running away from Saul, Joab was there with him, helping him. He was a general of David's, and now I don't know. It feels a little like this is right after it said Joab was supporting his other son. It feels a little like revenge on that. So he's saying, you do what you're going to do, but he sort of was unfair or unjust or whatever. And that last line I read, do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. Don't let him die in peace. That's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Especially because Joab had been such a loyal servant of David.
Question.
Yeah.
Is Sheol a comparable adjective? Okay, what I'm trying to say. Damnation of the devil. And
It's an interesting. It depends on where you are. Sheol could be. It sometimes has been hell, and it sometimes has been something else. It's hard to say that it's specifically hell. It's a place that you don't want to. It's more like purgatory, maybe, kind of. I don't know. I don't know if it's well defined, but once you die, I'm going to see if I can find a reference here.
Yeah. The idea of purgatory has always left me confused.
Right. A place of still darkness, not well defined in the Tanakh, which is the Torah. Sheol is the subterranean underworld where the souls of the dead went after the body died. So it's not necessarily like everybody goes to Sheol, but then they get sorted out and some go to heaven and some go to hell. It's kind of a waiting room. That's sort of how I have read it. It's where you go when you die, but from there people are not, even the Bible is not real clear about what happens next. It's not hell, but some people refer to it as hell because it's I don't know. The way I like to think of it is like a waiting room.
Another one of those things we don't understand.
Right. But he says, when he says, don't let his regular head to go down to Sheol, don't let him die in peace. Right? It's not a specific place. I mean, it is a place, but it's, in this case, it's not necessarily a curse, right? It says, don't let him go to hell. That's not really what he's saying. But I want to continue here. Verse 7, deal loyally, however, with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table. For with such loyalty they met me when I fled from your brother Absalom. There is also with you Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a terrible curse on the day I went to Manheim. But when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death by the sword. Therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him. And you must bring his gray head down with blood to Sheol. So he says, it's two people that he said, oh, I won't hurt you, but I'm not going to protect you from my son who will be king after me.
Yeah, and he's gonna hurt you.
It's interesting. He's passing on the grudges that he's had on to his son. So I don't know if it's very fair, but whatever. Then David slept with his ancestors and was buried. I like that term. David slept with his ancestors
Mhm.
and was buried in the city of David. The time that David reigned over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years in Hebron and 33 years in Jerusalem. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his kingdom was firmly established. So the politics of this are really interesting to me. You have a son who thinks he lays claim to the throne and does all the things to sort of pave the way to laying claim to the throne, but never bothers to ask his father, the king. You notice that there was never a consultation. And in fact, the closest advisor of the king did not support it. And so then you created this sort of issue. And then when he finally did decide, when he did sort of anoint his son Solomon king, he says, well, I did this, but you should do that. Or I did this and you should like hold my grudges or hold these. Some of the people that he said you should punish were people that David promised he wouldn't punish, but now David's not there anymore. So that's sort of interesting. Like these people, I made an oath to protect, but I still don't like them. So you deal with them after I'm dead. I don't, I wonder if we can't let our grudges be our grudges and let them die with us. But
Apparently not back then. Apparently not back then.
Apparently not.
And apparently we still fight the same way that they fought back then.
Even in death, David's a bit of a scoundrel.
Yeah.
He's a little bit. David is such an interesting character. So now we have Solomon as king. I'm trying to read. Solomon is not old. And I'm trying to figure out how old Solomon is, because every time I read this, the fact that Solomon doesn't have a voice in the first chapter and a half, and David's only been king 40 years total. I'm just wondering if there's a reference to the age of Solomon, because Solomon can't be very old. I mean, like I'm assuming he's like a teenager at this point, but I don't know. I don't know. Anyway.
Well, we don't know how many years David had been on the throne when he had the affair with Bathsheba, do we?
We could probably figure it out. I only say this because I feel like
I would say Solomon could not have been more than 20.
That's kind of where I'm at. I found it. I found something. Solomon was king of Israel when 12 years old.
Okay.
Goodness.
It actually, we'll say that later on in Second Kings. So
Okay.
there's some hints, but yeah. So I feel like why going back to the Adonijah, why is it that the eldest king is the heir usually? Because they're old enough to have being able to make some decisions, and they've already made some decisions. They probably have a family thing, and Adonijah has some legal right and some understanding to do that. So it does feel a little weird that Solomon is now king at the age of 12. And he has good advisors and his prophets with him, but still. Then Adonijah, son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. She asked, "Do you come peaceably?" He said, "Peaceably." Then he said, "May I have a word with you?" She said, "Go on." He said that you know that the kingdom was mine and that all Israel expected me to reign. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me. She said to him, "Go on." He said, "Please ask King Solomon. He will not refuse you to give me Abishai the Shunammite as my wife." Bathsheba said, "Very well, I will speak to the king on your behalf." So that's interesting. So you remember who Abishai was? She was the virgin who was there to keep David warm in his last days. Not to have sex with him, but to keep him warm. And so Adonijah asked essentially Solomon's permission to have her as his wife. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him on behalf of Adonijah. The king rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne and had a throne brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. Then she said, "I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me." And the king said to her, "Make your request, my mother, for I will not refuse you." She said, "Let Abishai the Shunammite be given to your brother Adonijah as his wife." King Solomon answered his mother, "And why do you ask Abishai the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom as well, for he is my elder brother. But ask not only for him, but also for the priest Abiathar and for Joab, son of Zeruiah." So I'm not totally sure what's going on here. My Bible says Abishag's status in the court was ambiguous because of her unusual relationship with David. But Solomon clearly considers her to be a concubine. In this period, royal concubines normally became the property of the new king. So Solomon interprets Adonijah's request as a threat and uses it as a pretext to have him killed. The text is silent on the question of whether or not Bathsheba anticipated this result. What is a concubine is like property. It's not a wife. It's like property. So now we know why it said that when she came in to David, they did not have sexual relations. She was used as a bed warmer, one of those like hot water bottles, right? Those old-timey hot water bottles, right? So she's not a concubine. That means she's not the property of the king in that same sense. She may have been commanded to do it, but this is why King Solomon is upset. The concubine should pass from one king to the other, like property. But she's not a concubine, so it's a little bit of a gray area. Verse 23, then King Solomon swore by the Lord, "So may God do to me and more also, for Adonijah has divided this scheme at the risk of his life. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and placed me on the throne of my father David, and who has made me a house as he promised, today Adonijah shall be put to death." So King Solomon sent Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. He struck him down and he died.
Well, so much for competition.
There's an interesting kind of story here because I sort of think, well, maybe Adonijah is innocent in all this. Maybe he knew that it wasn't a concubine, and he just admired her and wanted her as his wife. But you're playing with fire to a certain degree when you've already had this conflict with your brother,
Mhm.
and you ask for someone in his court to be your wife. Like there's something there, and it's not clear even in my notes, as to what his intent was. But it sort of looks like it's an action that he's using to sort of show that he doesn't support. He's trying to dull the support for his brother as king.
Well, it really doesn't matter what his intentions were. It matters what Solomon thought they were. And that's,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And interesting that he uses Bathsheba as a pawn,
Mhm.
because he knows Solomon wouldn't refuse her. And that's part of why I want to bring up that we assume Solomon is young, right? Not to say that there haven't been other young rulers, but to be 12, we know in modern times, their brains aren't fully formed. They're still going through levels of formation. So it's interesting to give that much power to a 12-year-old. At the same time, it was very common around that age to get married, have children. So it's an interesting mix, like Mary, Jesus' mother, was probably 13 or 14 years old, right? Not very old. So I always, when I read some of this this morning, I'm reading all of this with the thought that Solomon is 12 years old.
Mm.
Well, I didn't know he was 12 until just now, but young, right? And he reacts rashly like a young person might. The king said to of course, it doesn't stop older people from reacting rashly. Remember, Saul was in his 70s and he was acting rashly toward David. So, you never know. The king said to the priest Abiathar, "Go to Anathoth to your estate, for you deserve death. But I will not at this time put you to death, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before my father David, and because you shared in all the hardships my father endured." So Solomon banished Abiathar from being priest of the Lord, thus fulfilling the word of the Lord that he had spoken concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh. So Abiathar was one of the ones that supported Solomon's brother, even though, along with Joab and some of the others who had, and Joab, we're going to talk about Joab next, who had been close supporters of David, but there's a new king and there's a new sheriff in town, right? So that's why the whole thing about David saying, "I'm going to die and I support these people, but once I'm dead, you can do whatever you want, and you should totally punish these people." Feels a little petty. When the news came to Joab, for Joab had supported Adonijah, though he had not supported Absalom, Joab fled to the tent of the Lord and grasped the horns of the altar. Sound familiar?
Mhm.
When it was told King Solomon, "Joab has fled to the tent of the Lord and is now beside the altar," Solomon sent Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, saying, "Go strike him down." So Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, "The king commands, come out." But he said, "No, I will die here." So they won't kill them if they're. It's like we played a game when I was a kid. It's if you're on base, it's like a base and tag. If you're on the base, you can't be tagged, right? If you're on the altar, you can't be killed. They refused. Solomon told him to go kill him, but he's touching the altar, so no, they're not going to kill him in that holy place.
Hmm.
Then Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, "Thus said Joab, and thus he answered me." The king replied to him, "Do as he has said, strike him down and bury him, and thus take away from me and from my father's house the guilt for the blood that Joab shed without cause. The Lord will bring back his bloody deeds on his own head, because without the acknowledgement of father David, he attacked and killed with a sword 2 men more righteous and more better than himself, Abner, son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa, son of Jotham, commander of the army of Judah." Now, So shall their blood come back on the head of Joab and the head of his descendants forever. But to David and to his descendants and to his house and to the throne, there shall be peace from the Lord forevermore. Then Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, went up and struck him down and killed him, and he was buried at his own house near the wilderness. The king put Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, over the army in his place, and the king put the priest Zadok in the place of Abiathar. So Solomon is purging the supporters of his brother,
Right.
And he's using this, he's coming up with reasons from previous sort of campaigns. Joab did act on his own to kill these two people that in the previous books against David said don't kill them, and he went and killed them anyway because they were bringing up, but Joab did that in support of David. So it's sort of like it's a catch-22, right? David won a battle, the kings retreated, and David said leave them alone, but they were going to raise up an army against David again, and Joab acted on his own and killed them. So Joab broke the word of David, but he did it to protect David. And David was, when he found out, he was upset about it, but at least he was more safe. These two guys weren't going to raise up an army against him. So Joab was a very faithful general for a long, long time. Joab, all through David's story, Joab is there at his right hand. And because he did this one thing, it just, I don't know. It feels a little petty, but it's partly because Joab supports Solomon's brother instead of Solomon for the king. So we have some of the same kind of stuff happening here that happened it's politics, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's politics that end in people being killed, but it's still politics. People being killed over politics. And the worst part about it is it has nothing to do with Solomon. Most of this happened before Solomon was born or when he was a baby. Right. So then the king sent and summoned Shimei, we're in verse 36, and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there, and do not go out from there to any place whatever. For on the day you go out and cross the Wadi Kidron, know for certain that you shall die. Your blood shall be on your own head. There's another one that didn't support Solomon. And Shimei said to the king, the sentence is fair, as my lord the king has said, so will your servant do. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem many days. Says it's okay, you can live, but don't go anywhere else. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of Shimei's slaves ran away to King Achish, son of Maacah of Gath. When it was told Shimei, your slaves are in Gath, Shimei arose and saddled a donkey and went to Achish in Gath to search for his slaves. Shimei went and brought his slaves from Gath. When Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and returned, the king sent and summoned Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and solemnly adjure you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and go to any place whatever, you shall die. And you said to me, the sentence is fair, I accept. Why then have you not kept your oath to the Lord and the commandments with which I charged you? The king also said to Shimei, you know in your own heart all the evil you did to my father David. So the Lord will bring back your evil on your own head. But King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. Then the king commanded Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So Solomon gets rid of all of his rivals, of everyone who didn't support him. He starts off his kingdom making sure that those that don't support him don't live too long. But he justifies it. Never once does he say in any of these cases, you're going to be killed because you didn't support me to be king. That never comes up. but you're going to die because of this, or you're going to die because of that, and other things. It's interesting. We are at 56. So that is the establishment of Solomon. We're going to have some interesting stories about Solomon and this and the one of the most. I was kind of hoping we get through chapter 3, but do you remember the story? I don't think it comes up in the lectionary, but two women they live in the same house. They each have a
Mhm.
child. One child dies, and Solomon is asked to judge over. Oh, and one says that it was a son. They both say that the living son is theirs. And they come to judge him. That's going to be in the next chapter. And that's what sort of establishes Solomon as this wise judge, which is I think a very interesting. So, like I said, we haven't had them yet, but a lot of Kings has little stories like that are stuck in. I mentioned the story of Naaman is in Kings, and there's other stories. So we'll have that. Even though the beginning of his kingship is a little bloody, I don't know. I feel that there's just a personal judgment call. I feel like a lot of Solomon's reign is more marked by wisdom and good deeds by people, and David is sort of just out there fighting all the time. So
According to my Bible, it said that, those 3 deaths that Solomon went ahead and instigated were actually stated by David to needed to happen before Solomon could have complete control. So he was just merely fulfilling David's wishes.
well, yeah, and David said that, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, basically, reading between the lines, David didn't say this directly, but reading between the lines, David said,
Right.
These people didn't support you to be king.
Mm-hmm.
And you have nothing against them, but they did these things while I was king. And so if you want an excuse to get rid of them, here's some good excuses.
Yeah.
That's really what it was.
Plus, he was really young too, so he would have needed that kind of protection,
right,
from
right.
those guys.
Right. It's just a little unfortunate. I mean, I guess I feel bad for a lot of characters in the Bible because put it this way. The promise of Solomon to be king was kind of a private event. And maybe it wasn't announced throughout the kingdom. And so Adonijah, who's his rightful heir, his eldest son, logically will be king. Now, no one, the step he took that he shouldn't have taken was to sort of start preparing his court ahead of time, right? Before David's dead, he's already sort of getting, greasing the wheels, right? He's sort of naming his cabinet. It'd be like a presidential candidate started naming his cabinet before he's elected, right? That's kind of what he does. Now, that's a mistake, but in some ways, he's not wrong. As the eldest son, that's sort of what happens, right? So those other people that are supporters of David and have always been supporters of David say, right, this is the rightful way that things are supposed to happen, and they support him. And then that support ends up being what ends up causing their death, right? I kind of feel bad for them because they're just following the normal chain of events, right? So instead, and presumably David has a lot of sons still, even though some of them died in this whole thing previously. With Absalom, presumably David has a lot of sons. So Solomon being picked out of the bunch in some ways it's, I mean, I think Solomon, knowing the story ahead of time, it's a good thing I know what comes next, right? Knowing the story ahead of time, I think Solomon was a great choice for king, but it was an unusual choice. And so it's almost like a little unfair to those guys. Well, we supported the rightful heir to the king. We shouldn't have to die for that because that's what normally happens,
Mhm.
right? But not in this case. So David, you know, lives and dies a bit of a scoundrel. Even on his deathbed, he's like, I know you have nothing against these guys, but let me give you some dirt. Let me give you some dirt on these guys. So you can justify killing them, and then you won't, like you said, Nancy, you won't have any rivals.
Hmm.
You kill off your rivals, you can have a pretty peaceful kingship, right? So, well, let's end there. I feel like ending in prayer, so let's end in prayer. I don't pray enough on these things, so I should pray more. Dear Lord, thank you for this time we've had to study your word, to study your servant David, your servant Solomon, and all the other precursors to our faith. Help us gain wisdom and knowledge about who we are and why we worship you through the stories of these people. And thank you for this time of Lent, this time of growth and discovery, of time of inner peace, a time of greater understanding of our connection between each other and with you. All this shall we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Um,